In the 13th and 14th centuries, numerous European travelers made the harrowing journey across Asia to reach the courts of the great Khans of the Mongol Empire. Yet few persons born in what is now China made the trip westwards to Europe, and of these, none is more famous than Rabban Bar Sauma, a Turkic Christian who travelled from Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing, to the western edge of France, visiting Khans, kings and popes. If travelling is your hobby and you like to make fun videos, the sponsor of today's video, Filmora Go, is a great app to have on your phone. Filmora Go is an easy-to-use application available on Androids and iPhones, allowing you to create full-featured videos, and millions are using the app to make videos easily for YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter and other platforms, or for personal use. This free video editor and free movie maker has over 1,000 music tracks. It can use your memory to add music and allows you to add your own voiceover to create game videos, vlogs and much more. Filmora Go has more than 5,000 premium transitions, stickers and templates, while its intuitive trim and cut, merge and join, slice and split features make editing a breeze. You can control speed, color correct, add animations and export videos in HD quality quickly with Filmora Go. The app is also capable of uploading your videos, which means that your videos can be shared effortlessly. Members of the Kings and Generals channel have been using Filmora Go to edit the videos on their phones, and you can do the same by downloading this awesome app from the link in the description. Consider leaving a review for the app if you like it. Sauma was born around 1225 in the city of Yanqing, on which Beijing now sits. Yanqing had been under Mongol control since 1215. Wrested from the Jurchen Jin dynasty through a long and bloody siege. Sauma was born to Turkic parents, either Ongud or Uyghur, two groups which had long since recognized the supremacy of Genghis Khan. Sauma's parents were Christians of the Church of the East, often called Nestorians. Nestorius was a 5th century archbishop of Constantinople who had argued, among other things, the distinction between Christ's humanity and his divinity, and that Mary was mother of Jesus the man, but not of Jesus the God. For if God had always existed, then he could not have a mother. For this, Nestorius was excommunicated at the Council of Ephesus in 431, and his followers scattered across the east. From the Sassanid Empire they spread across Central Asia, reaching China during the Tang dynasty. By the 12th century, the adaptable Nestorian priests converted several of the tribes of Mongolia, from the Naiman, the Keriot, to the Ongud, to which Sauma likely belonged. The young Sauma took his faith seriously, so seriously his parents sought to dissuade him, fretting the end of their family line if their son became a monk. Refusing fine meats and alcohol, Sauma instead hungered for ecclesiastical knowledge and purity. Accepted into the Nestorian clergy of Yanqing in 1248, at age 25 he donned the tonsure and garb of the monk. Developing a reputation for asceticism beyond even his fellow monks, he largely secluded himself in his own cell for 7 years before leaving the monastery for the mountains. His devotion to Christ made him famous among the Nestorians of North China and Mongolia, attracting the attention of a young Ongud named Marcos. From the Ongud capital of Koshang in Inner Mongolia, Marcos was mesmerized by the stories of the holiness of Sauma. The 15-year-old Marcos marched by himself to Sauma in 1260. Impressed by the youth's tenacity, even as he attempted to dissuade him from joining the monastery, Sauma eventually took Marcos under his wing. Marcos proved himself an excellent student, and within 3 years was accepted into the Nestorian monastic life. Sauma and Marcos became fast friends and pillars of the Nestorian community around Yanqing, by then the capital of the new Mongol Emperor Kublai, and renamed to Dadu, or Khanbalik to Turkic and Mongolian speakers. While Sauma was happy to spend his life in the mountains, Marcos was much more energetic and sought to convince his friends to partake in the most difficult of journeys to the holy city of Jerusalem to be absolved of their sins. Sauma tried to scare Marcos off this goal, and it was not until around 1275 that Sauma was convinced to accompany his friend. They went to Khanbalik for an escort and supplies, and here news of their mission came to the most powerful monarch on the planet, Kublai Khan. Several sources, such as the Syriac Catholicos Bar Hebraeus, attest that Sauma and Marcos were sent west by Kublai to worship in Jerusalem or baptize clothes in the River Jordan. Such a task is similar to the orders Kublai gave to Marco Polo's father and uncle, instructed to bring back Catholic priests and sacred oil from Jerusalem for Yuan China. Kublai often tried to appear a friend to all religions within his realm, and may have felt the need to honor his own mother's memory, as she had been a Christian. That Sauma and Marcos went with the blessings of the great Khan, holding his paisa, passport, would explain the favored treatment they received over their voyage. Setting out around 1275, Sauma, Marcos and an escort began their journey to the west. Through the Yuan Empire they were met by ecstatic crowds of Nestorians coming out to see the holy men, showering them with gifts and supplies. 2 on-good nobles, sons-in-laws to the great Khans, provided more animals and guides for them, though they warned of the dangers now that the Mongol Khanates were at war. They followed one of the primary routes of the Silk Road, via the former territory of the Tangut Kingdom, the Gansu Corridor, to the Tarim Basin, cutting south along the desolate Taklamakan Desert, the harshest stretch of their journey. After staying in Khotan, they moved on to Kashgar, shocked to find it recently depopulated and plundered, a victim of Kaidu Khan. Passing through the Tian Shan Mountains to Talas, they found the encampment of that same Khan. Here they minimized any connections they had to Kublai, instead portraying themselves on a mission of personal religious conviction. Kaidu let them through, and Sauma and Marcos continued on a seemingly uneventful trip through Kaidu's realm, the Chagatai Khanate, and into the Il Khanate. Sauma and Marcos' journey to Jerusalem halted in Mariga, a chief city of the Il Khanate. There, the head of the Nestorian Church, Patriarch Mardenha, found use for these well-spoken travelers affiliated with the Khan of Khans. Mardenha had not made himself many friends within the Il Khanate, in part for his hand in the violent murder of a Nestorian who had converted to Islam. As a result, the Il Khan, Hulagu's son Abaka, had not provided letters patent to confirm Denha in his position, wary of alienating the Muslims of his kingdom. Mardenha believed monks sent from Abaka's uncle Kublai would be most persuasive. Abaka Il Khan treated Sauma and Marcos generously, and perhaps influenced by his Christian Byzantine wife, on their urging he agreed to send Mardenha his confirmation. In exchange, Mardenha was to provide an escort for Sauma and Marcos to reach Jerusalem, but the roads were closed due to war between the Il Khanate and the Mamluk Sultanate. Returning to Mardenha, he told them visiting his own patriarchate was just as good as visiting Jerusalem, and gave them new titles. Both were made Rabban, the Syriac form of rabbi. Marcos was made Metropolitan of the Nestorians of Eastern Asia, essentially a bishop, and given a new name, Yabhalaha, by which he is more often known, while Rabban Bar Sauma became his Visitor General. Suddenly promoted, but unable to return east due to a breakout of war between the Central Asian Khanates, Rabban Sauma and Mar Yabhalaha stayed in a monastery near Arbil until the sudden death of Mardenha in 1281. His experience with the Mongols and knowledge of their language made Yabhalaha a prime candidate to succeed Mardenha, and the other metropolitans anointed him Patriarch of the Nestorians. Wisely, Rabban Sauma encouraged Yabhalaha to immediately seek confirmation from Abaka Il Khan, who appreciated the move and rewarded Yabhalaha and the Nestorians of the Il Khanate with gifts and tax privileges. Abaka soon died, and Yabhalaha and Sauma faced scrutiny under Abaka's successor, his Muslim brother Teguda Ahmad. Accusations were made that the Nestorians were defaming Teguda Il Khan in letters to Kublai. Placed on trial before the Il Khan, the two friends outlasted him. In 1284, Teguda was ousted and killed by Abaka's son, Arghun. Mar Yabhalaha immediately paid homage to Arghun, in him finding a firm supporter. With Arghun's backing, Yapalaha removed his enemies from within the Nestorian Church and strengthened his power. Desiring to complete the war with the Mamluk Sultanate, under Arghun, efforts to organize an alliance with Christian Europe against the Mamluks reached new heights. Desiring the most effective envoy possible, Arghun turned to Mar Yapalaha to suggest an influential, well-traveled and respectable Christian to send to spur crusading fervor, aided by promises that Arghun would restore Jerusalem to Christian hands. Yapalaha had just the man. Turning to his longtime friend, Yapalaha asked Rabban Bar Sauma to carry the Ilkhan's messages west. Provided letters for the kings and popes, as well as paisas, gold, animals and provisions. In the first days of 1287, after a tearful goodbye with Mar Yapalaha, the 62-year-old Rabban Sauma set out, accompanied by at least 2 interpreters from Italy in his escort. The first steps of his route are unclear, likely taking the caravan routes from northern Iraq to somewhere along the southeastern Black Sea coast. From there, they took a ship to Constantinople. Emperor Andronikos II politely welcomed the embassy, dining them and providing a house for their stay. Giving the gifts and letters from Arghun, Rabban Sauma met his first frustration as efforts to broach military aid led nowhere. Whatever disappointment he felt was offset with a tour of the sites of Constantinople, especially the great church of Hagia Sophia. In his homeland, churches were small buildings or even mobile tents. In Ani, in Armenia, he saw a city famous for its many churches. But nothing could compare to the majesty of the Hagia Sophia, the quality and color of its marble, its 360 columns, the great space and seemingly floating roof. The mosaics, the shrines and relics, alleged to date to the earliest days of Christianity, all captured Sauma's heart, and in his laconic account of his travels, it is these which earn the greatest description. Departing Constantinople by sea, he set out for Rome. The voyage was rough, and on the 18th of June 1287, he was greeted by a terrifying spectacle, the eruption of Mount Etna, where fire and smoke ascended day and night. Passing Sicily, he landed at Naples, where he was welcomed by Charles Martel, the son of the Napolese king Charles II, then imprisoned in Aragon. From the mansion Sauma stayed at, on June 24th he watched Charles's forces be defeated by the Aragonese fleet in the Bay of Sorrento. Sauma remarked his surprise that the Aragonese forces, unlike the Mongols, did not attack the non-combatants they came across. European chroniclers attest that later in June, after Sauma had moved on to Rome, the Aragonese began ravaging the countryside anyways. In Rome, Sauma's hopes to meet the Pope were dashed as Honorius IV had died in April that year. Finding the cardinals in the midst of a long conclave to choose his successor, Sauma was welcomed before them as an envoy of the Ilkhan. Unwilling to commit to any alliance without a pope, the cardinals instead asked where Sauma came from, who the Patriarch of the East was, and where he was located. Avoiding Sauma's attempts to get back to his diplomatic purpose, the cardinals then shifted to theological matters, grilling Sauma on his beliefs. The Nestorian impressed them with his knowledge of the early church, and managed to deftly slide past the disputes which had caused the excommunication of Nestorius some 860 years prior. Finding no progress on the diplomatic mission, Sauma engaged in a more personal interest, exploring the ancient relics and monuments to Christendom. The account of Sauma's journey indicates he visited all the churches and monasteries that were in Great Rome. At times, he misunderstood the strange customs of the locals, believing the Pope enthroned the Holy Roman Emperor by using his own feet to lift the crown onto his head. With no progress to be made in Rome until the new Pope was elected, Sauma searched for kings of the Franks most known for crusading. By the end of September 1287, Sauma was in Paris, there greeted with a lavish reception by King Philip IV, who hosted a feast for this illustrious envoy. Speaking of the Ilkhan's intention to return Jerusalem to the Christians should they aid him, Philip was moved. stating that if these non-Christians were willing to fight for the Holy City, then it was incumbent upon all Christians to join them. Philip promised to send a nobleman alongside Rabban Sauma to bring his answer to Aachen. With at least one king seemingly on board, Sauma spent the next month touring Paris, visiting churches, and was impressed by the great volume of students within the city. Philip showed Sauma the private relics of the French kings, including what Philip claimed was the crown of thorns, sold to his grandfather by the Emperor of Constantinople in 1238. Around mid-October 1287, Rabban Sauma had moved across France to Gascony, where the King of England Edward I was staying at Bordeaux. Edward was known to the Mongols, having gone on an inconclusive crusade in the early 1270s. Earlier that year, Edward promised to take up the cross again and was excited by the talks. Promising assistance, he invited Rabban Sauma to partake in the Eucharist with him, gave him leave to visit the local churches, and provided gifts and assistance when Sauma went back on the road to Rome. Feeling himself successful, by the time he returned to Rome in early 1288, a new pope had been elected, Nicholas IV. Having interacted with each other during Sauma's first visit to the cardinals, Sauma and the new pope got on splendidly. Kissing the hands and feet of Pope Nicholas, Sauma was provided a mansion for his stay in Rome and invited to partake in the feasts and festivities around Easter. Sauma on occasion led the Eucharist beside the Pope, drawing crowds from across Rome eager to see how this foreign Christian undertook Mass. Though the language differed, the crowds were ecstatic that the rites themselves seemed the same. Despite their friendship, no promises of organizing a crusade against the Mamluks were forthcoming, and Sauma looked to returning to the Ilkhanate. Nicholas asked Rabban Sauma to stay in Rome with him, but Sauma insisted he was only there as a diplomat and it was his duty to return east. The Nestorian did convince the head of the Catholic Church to give him holy relics, a piece of Jesus' cape, the kerchief of Virgin Mary, and fragments from the bodies of several saints. Along with those were several letters for the Ilkhan, Marja Palaha, and Rabban Sauma. Copies of these letters survive in the Vatican archives, and though the letter to Yabalaha confirms him as the head of the Christians of the East, it is surprisingly condescending, explaining basic tenets of Christianity. Embracing Rabban Sauma one final time, he was dismissed and by boat returned to the Ilkhanate. On his return, he was warmly welcomed by his longtime friend Marja Palaha and the Ilkhan Aghan. Aghan hosted a feast for them, personally serving them and richly rewarding the old man for his great efforts. Yet his efforts came to naught. The Pope had provided no assurances, and despite continued correspondence, neither Philip nor Edward committed men to the Holy Land, too preoccupied with their own conflicts. Aghan sent an embassy in 1289 telling the two monarchs that he would march on Damascus in January 1291 and meet them there. Distracted by turmoil on his borders, Aghan instead died of illness in March 1291. Acre, the final major Crusader stronghold, was taken by the Mamluks 2 months later, ending the Crusader kingdoms and the possibilities of European-Mongol cooperation. Rabban Sauma largely retired to his own church for his last years, but along with Marja Palaha continued to visit the court of the Ilkhans, particularly Gaikatu, who continued to patronize minority religions of the Ilkhanate. Perhaps in 1293, they met another international traveler, Marco Polo, who spent much of that year in the Ilkhanate during his return from China. We have no way of confirming this, though we can imagine Gaikatu Ilkhan introducing two men who had both travelled across the continent, humoured by the individuals brought together by Mongol rule. Rabban Sauma died in January 1294, leaving his friend Marja Palaha alone in an Ilkhanate that, after the death of Gaikatu and the conversion of the Ilkhans to Islam, grew increasingly mistrustful and hostile to non-Muslims. By the time of Marja Palaha's death in 1317, the brief flourishing of the Nestorian Church under Ilkhanate patronage was over, and their influence across Central Asia dissipated with the continued conversion of Mongols across the region. The journey of Rabban Sauma was forgotten. His Persian diary on his voyages soon translated into Syriac after his death, but lost until its rediscovery in the 19th century. Translated into several languages, Sauma's journey shines another light on the integration of East and West under the Mongols, when for the first time a Christian Turk from China could travel to the Pope and Kings of Europe. We're planning more videos on famous travelers, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.